week, Gal Gadot said she's an indigenous person of Israel, the same week that Israel has killed over 500 people, 200 of them children, in just 3 days. Because Israel is a settler colony. And someone needs to tell Gal Gadot, or should I say Gal Greenstein, because her parents only Hebraized their last name like a few years before she was born. She's Polish, Austrian, German, and Czech by her own admission. So Gal Greenstein, you and me, we're relatives from Eastern Europe, not Palestine. And you cannot be indigenous to a settler colony, because a settler colony by definition is not indigenous. And Israel is a settler colony committing genocide. Gal, I'd like to read you a little from my book, Genocide Bad, novel concept, from a chapter talking about whether or not, Israeli Jews can be indigenous to Palestine. It comes from the 9th chapter of the book entitled Jews Are Entitled to Palestine, which looks at 4 different arguments for why Jews are supposedly entitled to Palestine. The first one being because the Bible said so. Spoiler alert, no, it doesn't. The second part of the chapter is Jews are entitled to Palestine because international law says so. Spoiler alert, no, it doesn't. The fourth part of the chapter is Jews are entitled to Palestine because some of them were born there, and you'll have to read the book to see what I have to say about that. Third part of the chapter takes on the idea that Jews are entitled to Palestine because they are indigenous there. And let's just dive into what history and research and the meanings of words has to say. And Gal, I would love to send you an early copy of this book. Have your publicist send me your mailing address and I'll get it right in the mail to you. So I grew up believing, and I think most Ashkenazi Jews believe this, that even though we were from Europe, at some point our people had migrated from Palestine. But then I read Shlomo Sand, and this idea that I grew up believing that I came from Palestine, that there was some mass exile of Jews from Canaan into Europe, is as bogus as the Exodus story. If there had been a mass migration of Jews from Palestine to Europe in the 1st century, that would show up in the historical record, in coins and pottery and textiles and historical texts, but the evidence just isn't there. Shlomo Sand, again, this is the historian I've been quoting in this chapter, explains that many of his critics insist on defining historical Jewry as a people, one unique, exceptional, and immune to comparison. Such a view could be maintained only by providing a mythical image of the exile of a people that ostensibly took place in the 1st century BCE, despite the fact that the scholarly elite was well aware that such an exile never really occurred during the entire period in question. For this reason, not even one research-based book has thus been written on the forced uprooting of the Jewish people. So that was a quote from Shlomo Sand's The Invention of the Jewish People. Just think about that. There's not one scholarly book with, compelling evidence about this mass exodus that supposedly occurred, this expulsion of Jews from Palestine into Europe. It just didn't happen. The historical record isn't there. Not one scholarly book. And academics know this. All the historians and the academics in the region, they know this. Okay, now this is me again going on. Sand accuses his critics of obfuscating the truth that Judaism from the 2nd century BCE to the 8th century CE was a proselytizing religion, meaning that Jews went out and converted other people, which we don't do much anymore unless you're Chabad. But back then, Judaism was very much proselytizing. And the Judaism mostly likely spread through Europe, North Africa, and Southwest Asia through conversion. So Jews today are not all one ethnic people or race, as anti-Semites and Zionists jointly assert. We're a bunch of different ethnic groups who share a religion, or more often, we have ancestors who once did. Then there's a discussion of the genetic science around this, but that's actually kind of a red herring, because I want to skip ahead because whether or not this story is true actually is immaterial to the consideration of whether or not Jews are indigenous to Palestine. Let's return to the word indigenous, which, as I said, does not even mean this popularly held idea of having ancestors who, at some conveniently chosen point in time, lived in a place. The word indigenous was created by colonizers from the Latin indu, in within, and gignere, to beget, produce. The first recorded use was in 1588 when an English diplomat used it to describe the Samoyed people of Siberia as indigene, or people bred upon that very soil. He probably literally meant sprung from the soil, because in the 16th century, some scholarly Europeans believed in polygenesis, the idea that different races had originated in different places on Earth independently of one another. So like literally in the 16th century, these, scientists thought that different ethnic groups had just sort of glommed up out of the soil in different parts of the world at different times. That's the caliber of scientific thinking that came up with the word indigenous. Now, the term indigenous begins to appear in more European writings in the 1640s, the height of the colonial era, to describe the people, flora, and fauna that were living in the places that colonizers were colonizing. So the word indigenous has always existed within a binary, a Western framework of colonizer and indigenous person. One does not exist without the other. And according to this framework, an indigenous person cannot be a colonizer and vice versa. In 2024, many Western liberals hold a great deal of token reverence for indigenous people. And because deference politics asks us to defer uncritically to the most marginalized person in the room, Zionist claims of indigeneity to Palestine have a way of shutting down criticism of Israel. And that's exactly what Gal was trying to do. Non-Jewish liberal white people, frightened of being accused of anti-indigeneity, are particularly susceptible to this silencing tactic. Their critical mind shuts down, and they forget that when people walk like colonizers, talk like colonizers, commit ethnic cleansing, genocide, and devastate the land like colonizers, then they are colonizers, and colonizers cannot be indigenous. I'm not the only person to think that colonizers and indigenous people are mutually exclusive categories. In When Does a Native Become a Settler?, Mizrahi Jewish sociologist Yuval Evry and political theorist Hagar Kotev argue that in the early 20th century, there were Palestinian Jews who were indigenous to Palestine. Not Gal Gadot's family, Gal Greenstein's family. They were from Eastern Europe, like mine. But there were Palestinian Jews who were indigenous to Palestine. These Palestinian Jews were subject to Ottoman and British colonizers, but when Jewish Zionists took power in the region, most Palestinian Jews assimilated into Ashkenazi society. In doing so, they gave up their indigeneity to become settlers. So to recap, Gal, your family is not from Palestine, and even if they were, you would not be indigenous to Palestine, because you've very clearly chosen to be a colonizer. You've proudly worn the uniform of an occupying settler colonial army that is currently committing genocide. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, 500 of them in the last 3 days, and you continue defending this genocide and this genocidal settler colony. So no, Gal, you are not indigenous to anywhere. You're as much of a white settler with European ancestry as me. Again, Gal, would love to send you an early copy. And all of you watching can win an early copy this week, because I'm doing another giveaway this week in support of Taline and her family. She's a 9-year-old girl with diabetes in Gaza, which is a very bad situation right now, with the total siege of Gaza not allowing any food or insulin into the Gaza Strip. If you entered to win the giveaway for her campaign last week, you can enter again. It's a new giveaway. To enter, you're going to go to my Linktree, donate as much as you can to her campaign, and send a screenshot to t4gaza@gmail.com. I'll choose a winner next Monday, and you'll get a signed, personalized copy of Genocide Bad weeks earlier than anybody else. And to make sure you get your copy, don't forget to pre-order. Now tell me in the comments, is there anything more embarrassing than a white person pretending to be indigenous? I don't think so.